Story is the capability that reveals these emotion currents, this emotion data, where if we're trying to move something forward, then we need to surface these hidden currents of emotion. And story is the language that allows you to do that really intuitively.
Hey, Creating Maven. I'm Joy Spencer, your reframe specialist, with one important message. Your real work, it's not your job or your career. Your real work is what you create. And what you create is what sets you apart and makes you incomparable. It's your legacy. I'm here to show you a whole new way of working so you can create with your gifts, make a unique contribution, and finally get paid to be yourself. This is Reframe to Create. Stories aren't just for entertainment. They are for meaning and sense-making in community. This is the main thrust, but not the only powerful nugget from my conversation with my guest who joins us today, David Hutchens. David is a storyteller, consultant, and creator of some of my favorite narrative tools for leaders and teams. He has been exploring the intersection of narrative, leadership, and complex systems change for more than 20 years. And in this episode, David takes us deeper into our conversation about collective storytelling, which we began with Brett Davidson. If you listen to that episode, which was episode 118, you'll see that this conversation is a beautiful companion to that conversation that I had with Brett. With Brett, we talked about storytelling for strategy, the shift from storytelling to story listening, and how focusing only on individual stories can actually keep people in silos instead of bringing them together. So with Brett, he helped us to see how collective narrative can support collaboration and social justice and creating together. And with David, he takes us even deeper into how we make meaning together once those stories are in the room. David's credentials include being a best-selling author, business writer, and a learning designer. He has created many solutions for big brand companies, including Accenture, Harvard Business Review, the Coca-Cola Company, Walmart, IBM, and so many others. And his partnerships include a recurring instructor position with the globally renowned INSEAD School of Business in Fontainebleau, France. As always, y'all, I bring the folks with all the goods, right? So I am so excited to share this conversation with David. And if you are ready to heed the call to move from I tell the story to we make meaning and create the future together, then this conversation is for you. Let's get into it and hear what David has to say to help us to do that. David, what are we missing when it comes to storytelling, especially storytelling in teams?
I think what we're missing, Joy, is it might be right there in the word. Because when you hear that word storytelling, there's that telling piece. And it sounds like a one-way transaction that goes from me to the audience. And it's not. I always tell my teams that the story is only the beginning of the conversation. It's never the end of a conversation. It's always the beginning of a conversation, because after the story is told, we have this great opportunity to invite the team to become sense-making community and to bring meaning to the story that was just told. And now as we're bringing this interpretation together, now we're creating meaning about who we are and what it means to be us and what's important and what we value. So I think this interpretive sense-making conversation is a huge opportunity that a lot of people are missing.
Well, thank you for that. And why is that so important?
It's important because story is humanity's oldest sense-making technology. I mean, we've been doing this for tens of thousands of years, sitting around a campfire and telling stories and then having conversations where we say, hey, I heard something in that story. That story says something about who we are and what's important. And so it's important, especially in an organizational context, because we're not telling stories to entertain. We're telling stories to align. And so we want to say to the team, let's have this conversation. Let's draw some meaning out of the story. And now in the process, we're generating knowledge, forming identity, forming bonds of connection with each other, and also identifying some actionable wisdom within our lived stories that we can bring forward.
So you're speaking very clearly about this, and you didn't just pluck this out of thin air. How did you come to this very clear view and perspective about story as sense making and meaning making for you personally in your life or in your work?
Back in the early 2000s, I wrote a silly story for the Coca-Cola company. It was later published as a book. The book was called Outlearning the Wolves. And it's a silly story that originally was intended to help people at the Coca-Cola company understand what it meant to be a learning organization. If you remember Peter Senge and the fifth discipline, it was a really popular body of theory in the 2000s. So I wrote this silly story with cartoon animals in it to introduce this body of theory. And the thing I struggled with at first was I had this idea that, you know what, when you tell a story, you shouldn't talk about what it means. Stories work magic. Let the audience do this interpretive thing in the brains of the people. And what I found was with this fable, people didn't know how to interpret it. It wasn't having the impact that I wanted it to have. So there's the story, but then there's this piece that I added at the end where I said, I'd like to invite you into a sense-making conversation where we start doing some work with the metaphors and with the images and start drawing some meaning out of it. And what I found is that if you don't lead that conversation, people will go all over the place.
Yeah, because they're bringing their own experience and their varied interpretations to it.
Right. And it depends on what the outcome is that you want. I always say if the desired outcome is to enchant, you want people's imaginations just running freely, then don't host the sense-making conversation. But if your intention is to align and co-create, after the story is told, we say, okay, we're going to do something with this story and we're going to do it together.
Yeah, I think that's definitely relevant in organizations and with teams because they definitely want the latter. They definitely want the sense-making and aligning. I don't think that organizations are here to enchant folks. So they leave that to the Hollywood actors. So yeah, that I like that. And I appreciate that insight that you shared from that story because I think that I probably have this naive sense that it's automatic. Just throw the story in there and it'll, boop, voila, it's all in there. It'll just sort of like pop out. But you're indicating that if you do want it to do something, if you do want it to align and help a team or an organization go forward, there has to be that conversation. And what I like about that sense-making conversation, it's about doing it collaboratively in community. It's not a one-person thing. It requires co-creation.
It is co-creation. I actually think in the age of AI, I think this story sense-making conversation is becoming even more urgent. I'm getting a lot more interest since the advent of artificial intelligence. More people are reaching out to me saying, we need this different kind of sense-making that's born from our collective experiences. And it's the thing that AI can't do for us.
Yeah.
AI doesn't know what happened in the meeting yesterday. We have to talk to each other and do something with that together.
Yeah, it's really getting to back to that organic aspect of humanity and living, and just exactly that, the parts of our society that are alive and living and generative, and you need that in community and in collaboration and in real dynamic conversation. So I'm heartened to hear that because, you know, the AI boogeyman tends to be the conversation in a lot of fields. It's good to know that that's actually driving us in some circles, a conversation back to community and us being together and present with that.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. There's a period before AI. I almost had this moment of this small faith crisis where I thought, I wonder if the story thing has played out. And fortunately, my lapses in faith are usually short-lived, and it's not played out at all. There's more interest and more urgency around this than ever before.
Yeah, because to your point, it's the, as you said, the oldest technology that we have for meaning making and sense making.
And identity and knowledge sharing. And so I have some thoughts on what that conversation can look like.
Yeah, say more.
When we talk about sense making, I mean, this is a deep discipline, you know, epistemology and how is knowledge formed and knowledge creation. There's a lot of models around this. There's one that I like to use because it's simple. People can grasp this pretty quickly. And this model comes from a colleague of mine named Paul Costello. Have you ever met Paul?
No, I have not.
Oh, lovely, lovely guy. Actually in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And he's a former Catholic priest. And so he actually draws this model from the process of hermeneutics, and where, you take the sacred text of your religion and you say, we're going to do some sense making from these old stories. So for example, if you want to interpret 1 Corinthians, for example, well, first you have to say, you know what, there's some things you need to understand about the government in Rome at the time, right? You have to get back in the space. So he's bringing this same process to the stories that we tell each other. And it's a model called the geography of meaning. The geography of meaning. It says that meaning is spatial, and that when I tell you a story, there are these different orientations from which we can find meaning. And there's meaning behind the text. And when I say the text, that's the words of the story that I spoke, right? There's meaning behind the text, there's meaning within the text, and then there's meaning in front of the text. And so if you like, I can quickly walk through what those three things are.
Yes.
So there's meaning behind the text. And this is where, let's say you've just told a story, Joy. This is where we then say to the team says, you know what, Joy, as you were telling your story, I noticed something about you, or about your energy, or I noticed something about myself and how I was responding, or I noticed something emerging in the room as you were telling the story. This is behind the text. So notice we're not even talking about the content of the story yet.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the story phenomenon.
And is this in a particular order? Do we have to go in this order, or?
In practice, we can jump around.
Okay.
As I explain it, I've got an order, but in practice, we can jump to any one of the orientations back and forth.
Okay.
So behind the text, here the listener's role is as witness. And again, we're noticing something about the story phenomenon. Then there's meaning to be found within the text. And this is where I might say, you know what, Joy, I noticed something in your story.
Mm.
I really liked that part where you made that bold decision, or, that I felt something emotional and powerful where you got to that point of conflict. So now we are talking about the story, and we're inside the story, and we're bringing kind of the same depth of analysis to it that we might bring, and if you studied Shakespeare in college, we would do some analysis of the text and what's going on in the story. So we're bringing that kind of analysis to each other. And here the listener's role is as harvester. And I like that image. It's like the story is this field of wheat. We want to go out and harvest all this good content and nutrition that's inside the story. And then there's meaning to be found in front of the story. And here, I might say things like, Joy, your story made me think of something. Or in that story, you had a really interesting behavior for dealing with conflict. The way you responded to your boss, that was a good behavior. Wow, what if more people on our team would respond to conflict the way you responded to conflict in the story? So now we're in front of the story. Now we're reaching inside of the story, and we're drawing actionable wisdom out of that story. We're saying, I heard something in that story that can move us forward into the future. And so here, the listener's role is as connector, connecting the content of your story to things that are important to us as we move forward. So those are the three listener roles.
Witness, harvester, and connector.
Yes, and that's behind, inside, and in front of the text.
So just to clarify, what's the difference between... Because the way you describe the witness is, what are we witnessing? We're witnessing how we are observing the storyteller and how we're feeling as we're listening to it, and how the room is responding to the story. How's the witness different from because the connector is specifically about lessons. The connector is observing lessons that they're pulling from inside the text of the story of this is how we can use it, move forward. So, but the witness is Is it about just like how we feel about what we just heard?
It's how we feel and what we notice it saying about us. So, Joy, the way you told that story, it was a happy story, but there was a little bit of sadness, is what I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think that says something about where we are. So now I'm taking witness and moving into a connector role.
Mm-hmm.
It says something about where we are, because ever since the merger and ever since the layoffs, there has been this air of sadness. There's this cloud hanging over us, and I could feel that in your story, right? So again, we're not talking about the story itself. I noticed something about you, and now I'm saying I think it says something about us.
I see that there's value in understanding the distinctions between these, but you could move very quickly between the three. It might not be so stark, like I'm witness now I'm connector, now I'm harvester, right? It could be a really dynamic experience in a conversation as the group is making meaning of this, or does this geography of meaning require there to be a stark sort of like, no, now we need to be witness now, we need to be harvesters now? How does this end up in practice?
I've seen it done both ways. I think the human response is to jump all over the place. Actually, that's the human response after we've mapped out these orientations. If you don't map out the behind, within, and in front of the story, everybody's going to go to just inside the story. It doesn't occur to people that they can talk about the story phenomenon and draw some meaning from that.
Yeah.
And also the process of making connections and taking something out of the story that we can bring forward. It's a pretty specific skill set. It's kind of hard for some people to do. So just naming this framework allows people to start thinking more broadly about how are we making meaning in the stories. But once we've done that, it can be pretty fluid. And I do find that people jump all over the place. And to the other answer to your question, we can also be pretty intentional in design and experience around this. My colleague, Mary Alice Arthur, has a process called collective story harvest, where we've got the community, and we'll have one person up in front and tell their story of community change or whatever it was. They tell the whole story. And we break the audience up into different groups, and we give each of them a listening lens. And team number one, your job is to pay attention to the energy of the story and be prepared to report back on that. Team number two, and you can get really granular with it. Team number two, tell me what you notice about, what does this story say about courage and fear? Be prepared to report back on that. And team number three, what gifts does this story have to our organization that we need to bring forward, right? So you can give assignments to teams, and then they're all listening through these unique lenses. So again, it can be fluid, or we can design an event around it where we give people these different roles.
I like the structure of it. I like that you can bring people into a room and give them an assignment of how to listen, because I think that's that story listening skill. We think we have it. We think we know how to listen, but something like this can really give you a good guidepost on how to listen in a way that helps you go deeper into a story and mine for the gold that I think a group or a team is looking for when they're trying to do the sense making and the meaning making and all of that. How have you seen this benefit a group, or like any clients or folks who you've worked with who've gone through a process like this? Why did they ask for this, or did they ask for it? And sort of like, what's the before and after for them?
Did clients ask for this? That's actually a really interesting question, because when it comes to storytelling, I work with organizational audiences. I like to work in big Fortune 500 companies. And most of my clients are thinking about storytelling for influence. If I tell a story, I can get people to do something, right?
Yes.
And that's where I began. I used to work in advertising. I was a copywriter. So yeah, I learned early, if I tell a story, people will buy more Coca-Cola. So leaders love that. And that's what most leaders are buying. But when I contract with my clients, what I say to them is, we can talk about story for influence, but when you invest in this capability, you're getting a lot more. And I actually have to walk most of my clients through sense making.
There's something more than influence?
Ooh. You mean we might have to listen to our people? Ooh, they might come up with an idea and then we need to do something different based on what the system fed back to us. So it can get controversial and scary for some people.
Yeah.
But to me, that's the richness of it. One thing I've noticed, Joy, is I've had this growing awareness that people who make meaning together become a community. There's something about sitting in a circle and talking about what things mean that joins our minds and our spirits with each other. Once we've become interpretive community, we're connected in sense making, and that's a special kind of community to be in.
That resonates with me right now because I'm involved in so many conversations about team building or team formation or team strengthening, or even how do you in organizations create very purpose-driven teams very quickly that may need to achieve a purpose and then disperse, and just how difficult that can be or unwieldy. And you saying that making meaning together creates community. I mean, it's like but also so profound that there is a technology, so to speak, this work of sense making with storytelling that helps to foment that helps to create, that helps to bring us into community either quickly or not quickly, but sort of like this is the key or the mechanism and the way to do it. And not just necessarily come together and, okay, here's the task that we want to achieve, boom, 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 here's the charter, or et cetera. But did we make meaning together? And if we make meaning together, we'll forge a better, a stronger, richer alliance, which has potential for, you didn't say this, I think, for innovation to happen and all the creativity to happen in those spaces. Because as you said, when people are making meaning together and we're listening to each other, we're getting information back from the system and answers that leaders may not know or be aware of. And if you're able to create that space, people have the freedom to see and be innovative, see around the corners together as they're making meaning together and pulling their knowledge together. Yeah. So you just made me think about a lot of things.
You're exactly right. This is at the heart of innovation. And I would add to that transformation, because story is a transformation art form. I mean, change is the heart of story. And this is where, there's change that happens in the story, but then there's change that happens after the story. And if you want that change after the story, we have to have this conversation. And your listeners who are either married or in relationships will recognize this. I mean, when me and my wife go to, my parents both passed away in the past 2 years, but when we used to go home and see my parents and, at Thanksgiving or whenever, on the drive back to Nashville from New Orleans, we would just debrief the hell out of everything that happened. And, oh my gosh, your mom did that thing again. And why did I respond the way I did? And hey, I felt kind of insecure at one point. And there was a really lovely moment. I love it, right? I mean, we talk about not only what happened, but what does it mean? And if we're going to have a strong relationship, we have to stay in this conversation. And it really surprises me that this thing that we do to build relationships with each other doesn't seem to show up in the organization very much. And those conversations are just as critical.
Yeah, no, I like that you're bringing that up, because people might think that they have it in organizations as the after action debrief. Maybe that one is just you in the story without being behind or in front of the story. Like, I don't know if I sort of like pull the thread of like what we're doing in that, or we're just talking about the task or the thing that happened, but we're not really engaging in the full spectrum of the meaning making together that you've described today.
I've seen different models for the after action review. In its truest form, we would be doing all three of those.
Okay. So there's overlap and possibility there.
Oh, absolutely. One thing I like to do, this is kind of a facilitator technique-y thing, but it can be really powerful. So, and I know you do this work as well, is inviting story circles, right? We've got the group and put everybody in groups of 4. I find groups of 4 or 5 are ideal for a story circle. And, we give them a prompt, tell me about a time that we served a client in a way that inspired you, or tell me about a time that we lived our values, or right. It depends on what the story is, but they take turns. The first person will say, okay, I'll go first. They tell their story to the group. And then what I'll say is the first storyteller, okay, turn your chair around. We're sitting in a circle, but the storyteller turns their chair around and now their back is to the rest of the circle. And I actually have a handout. In fact, I'll share that with your audience if you'd like to have it. A handout that is the geography of meaning handout with behind the text. Here's like 10 questions that will help you think behind the text. Within and in front, there's 10 more questions for each. So everyone's got the handout. And now the listeners have a conversation about the story they just heard. And the teller gets to eavesdrop on this conversation. With their back turned, they're not allowed to say anything, which drives them crazy because they're dying to say something. They're dying to go, no, that's not what I was trying to say. Nope. You don't get to say anything. Just let them receive it and listen to what they received. And so now the three have or four have a conversation, and then the teller gets to turn around and reflect back. Here's what I heard. Here's what challenged me. Here's some gifts I took from that. And it's a really beautiful sense-making conversation. And then we move on to the storyteller number 2 and repeat that process until everyone has had a chance to tell their story and listen to the team do some sense-making around the story.
Oh, I love that. I know that the first half of that is, something I'm familiar with. We do that. We've as we're, taking an appreciative lens, we will ask people to share stories about what was a moment when you were proud to be on this team, or like we ask for those type of stories, and people just share. But it's sort of like it goes from one person to the next person shares theirs, and we don't really make room necessarily for what you're talking about, that other piece of going deeper beyond storytelling to sense making, meaning making. And I love this idea of the person who shared, not getting to insert and reinterpret, but like there being room and space for the others to explore what's behind, what's inside, and what's in front of the text. I love it. How easy or difficult have you found this is for the average person who might say, okay, David and Joy are like storytelling nerds. They love the stuff. They live for it all day. But this is not my thing. I live in a completely different world. I'm a data person. I'm a technical person. I live in the other side of the work sphere. This is fluffy. This is not for me. How easy or difficult do you think it might be or is it, have you seen it for someone who thinks that this is not their area?
Most of my clients are technology and science and data and financial and engineering organizations. So that's my sweet spot. I work with super smart data people who talk about things that I don't understand, right? And then I help them move to this other part of their brain that is sense making and narrative and all of the emotional stuff. I don't get resistance for that. Maybe it's because I've gotten pretty good at how do I position this urgent conversation so that these data geeks can recognize the urgency, and they do. Normally, the way they recognize it is after they experience it. Because when we tell stories and when we have this conversation, we're up in our brains so much of the time, and then when when somebody tells a great story and you feel that energy move down into your body, and you go, oh. Joy's awesome. So now we're feeling something and people go, okay, that felt important. What am I supposed to do with this? All this emotion stuff that's coming up. I don't have a hard time getting people there.
Well, probably because you describe it as the oldest storytelling is the oldest technology that we have for sense making. I mean, that stood out to me. I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting way to phrase it and frame it. And I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. That sounds true. So I would imagine for someone who's technology, who's more of that view, you saying it's a technology, like, oh, let us see of this, what is this technology of which you speak that it's storytelling?
Technology is a strange word to connect to story, but if you look at the definition of technology, I mean, it's something that we employ to get some other result. And so story is a technology, and it's not a mechanical technology. It's a biological technology. But you're right. My data geeks respond well to that language. The other language I use to sneak this into data organizations, I'll talk about the emotional data in the system.
I mean, this is why you're the best at what you do. Like, I mean, what? The emotional data in the system? Could you say more words?
There are currents of emotion, invisible currents of emotion. They're invisible to most people that are moving through the organizational system, and we never tend to them. And yet when change is stuck, when we're wanting people to move, but they're not moving, usually it's for these human emotional reasons. People don't like it. They don't believe it. They don't trust you. They're mad. They're tired. They're scared. It's so story is the capability that reveals these emotion currents, this emotion data, where if we're trying to move something forward, then we need to surface these hidden currents of emotion. And story is the language that allows you to do that really intuitively. So yeah, they like emotion data.
It's good. I mean, I like emotion data.
Me too.
So for my listener who wants to, they're convinced and they want to get into this right away, what's their next most important step?
If your listener isn't already inviting their teams to tell stories, that's the next step, is bring your team together. And again, when you hear storytelling, you're thinking in terms of what are the stories I'm going to tell the team. Your team has stories you haven't heard. You would be amazed. The stories that are on your team that you haven't heard because we don't create enough occasions for them to come forward. So the story circle is one of humanity's oldest formats for connecting and doing this sense making. So bring the team together. Groups of 4, groups of 5. It's easy to facilitate. Give them a story prompt. It's tell me about a time when language, and you get to decide what that is, whether it's a values story or a vision story or customer service or identity, but invite a certain kind of story. And then part 2 is, first of all, your team will know what to do. We know how to sit in a circle and tell stories to each other. If your team members went out for dinner or drinks last night, they did this just a few hours ago. So they don't even need training. And then 2 is, if we want to invite the sense-making conversation, introduce a simple framework like the one that I shared with you today. You say to the team, after we tell a story, that's not the end of a conversation. It's the beginning, because I'd like to invite the rest of you to become interpretive community and talk about what you heard in the story. And I'm going to give you a simple way of doing that. And then again, I like the geography of meaning because of how simple it is. It's just these 3 orientations, and people can remember 3. And then give them an opportunity to practice this, and then just step out of the way and let them talk. And then the hard part will be shutting it down, because there'll be so much energy in this conversation that getting their attention back can be difficult.
Yeah, I love that. And if people are looking for good prompts, and you have a story deck and a number of other really great resources in your storytelling leader toolkit, which I will put all the details and ways that people can contact you and find out about that. But your story deck of cards, I think, is a great place for people to go to, or these leaders to go to, for prompts for the stories and getting that started. And you also have instructions in that toolkit of how people can form and have their own story circles. David is the storytelling guru genius with all the tools available. And so, and I want to make sure that people, because I use them and I want to, use and leverage them even more. And so I hope folks will get an opportunity to reach out to you or follow you on LinkedIn or wherever to get access to those resources, because you don't have to figure it out. Like David's already done the work for you. So just, grab one of his materials, get a prompt, get into the work, and gather your team, your community, and your organization around, and get into this work of making meaning, of sense making of all the stories that are already there, available and ready to be told.
Beautifully said.
What else do you want to leave my listener with?
This is something a little more tactical, but if your listener is interested in pursuing this, I do have a simple handout. It's a PDF document, the geography of meaning, and you can have it for free and print it up and share it with your team members, and they can use that to guide the sense-making conversation. They're welcome to have the PDF. I'll leave it up to you, Joy, whether it's in the show notes or do they reach out to me and I can share it on LinkedIn, but I'm happy to share this PDF.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that generosity, and for giving us very specific ways in which we can be better story listeners and do the work of sense making by being a witness, being a harvester, or being a connector, or being all three of them in a conversation with our teams as we go deeper than merely storytelling to sense making. So thank you.
Thank you, Joy. You know, I've been a fan for a long time, and this sense making is about reframing and recreating. So you're already in the conversation, and I'm delighted to join you.
Wasn't that so rich and full of goodness? I love all the different ways that David reframed storytelling for us, not as, this one way, let me perform for you moment, but as an invitation into sense making and co-creation. There are a few things I want you to remember and to not miss or forget from this conversation. First, and this is what David said so clearly, story is humanity's oldest sense-making technology. We have sat around in circles, told stories, and then talked about what they mean. This is something that we've always done. That's how we formed identity, shared knowledge, and decided what matters. Second, the story is not the end. David said that the story is the beginning of the conversation. If you're in an organization or part of a community, you're not telling stories to entertain. You're telling stories to align. And that alignment happens in the conversation after the story has been told. Third, he shared this amazing framework, this geography of meaning, where he showed us looking at the meaning behind the text, the meaning within the text, and the meaning in front of the text, and brought us into the options of having these three different listener roles. One of being the witness, where we ask what we notice about the storyteller, about ourselves in the room. The harvester, where we're looking for the images, the moments, and the insights that we can gather from within the story. And finally, being the connector, asking, how does the story help us to move forward? What wisdom can we carry into our future? That is such a powerful way to go from we heard a nice story to we just did some real meaning-making work together as a team. And finally, the part that made my Reframe to Create heart sing is this idea that people who make meaning together become a community. That's right. And that right there is Reframe to Create 2.0. We're moving from me and my story to we and our shared story. From solo creators to sense-making communities who create together. If you're ready to start this in your own team or organization, there are a lot of ways that you can go deeper with David and his work. Check out his story deck of cards and his storytelling leader toolkit for great prompts and guidance on running story circles. And use his free Geography of Meaning PDF as a handout with your team so that you can practice being witnesses, harvesters, and connectors in your story conversations. And definitely do what I do, which is connect with him on LinkedIn and through his website to explore his work with organizations, leaders, and teams. I'll put all those links and resources in the show notes so that you can grab them and get started right away. You don't have to figure this out alone. He has already built tools to help you. As you go back into your work, I want you to ask yourself, where can I stop telling stories that are just going out to my listener? And how can I start inviting my listeners, my team, my organization into story listening, and not just story listening, but sense making of those stories and then co-creation? How can we reframe to create together? Because remember, your real work is what you create. And in Reframe to Create 2.0, your real work is what we create together. through the stories we tell, the meaning we make, and the future we decide to build as a we. Let's keep reframing and keep creating together. See you soon, Creating Maven. Until then, remember to always ask yourself, what will we create?